Does what happens along the U.S.-Mexico border affect us in our backyards? Veteran journalist Richard Morosi, a Pulitzer finalist, says yes. He'll explain next on Global Perspectives.
This is Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to Global Perspectives. Why should we care about developments along the U.S.-Mexico border? Richard Morosi, a Pulitzer Prize finalist, reports on that region for the Los Angeles Times and has quite a story to share. Welcome to the show, Rich.
Thanks, John.
Did you get into journalism thinking that you would be reporting on U.S.-Mexico border issues?
Had no idea. I just wanted to tell good stories, and turns out the trajectory of my career led me to the U.S.-Mexico border about 10 years ago.
Now, you're probably in danger or close to danger much of the time that you're down there.
Yeah, some of my reporting has taken me to dangerous places. And so you got to be careful how you report things out. And after 10 years of doing it, I pretty much take precautions and do a lot of prep work and talk to my colleagues down in Mexico to find out what I can and can't do.
You've won a number of prizes for your work, and this is the year of the Pulitzer Centennial. Tell us about your Pulitzer-related accomplishments.
Well, back in 2012, I started doing stories about what happens to all of the Mexican immigrants that were deported from the United States. The Obama administration has deported millions. And I started running across these folks in border cities in Mexico and saw some interesting things, some fascinating stories. And I put together a series showing the different facets of what their lives become, these people discarded from the United States and really not welcomed or accustomed to living in Mexico. So a lot of these people just don't really have a country. It was called Without a Country, 6-part series, and that was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize a couple of years ago. Last year, I did a series of stories about where we get our produce in Mexico. Most people don't realize 50% of the tomatoes we eat in this country come from Mexico. A lot of them from huge agribusinesses in the northern states, and kind of stumbled upon some slave-like living conditions and work conditions of some of the people that supply the food that we eat.
So when you go out looking for a story, do you have an idea of what you'd like to cover, or do you sort of nose around and see what's happening, or a combination of the two?
Well, initially I do. I'll go out and I'll have an idea. But what's the best thing about journalism and serendipity, right? I mean, you start out in a small story and it kind of leads you in different directions. These stories about the deportees and the farm laborers, I didn't sit at my desk and realize I'm gonna do a story on this. No, it came from working other stories and stumbling upon interesting people, interesting places, interesting events. Like for instance, the story about farm labor grew out of another story I was doing about a kid, American citizen, who left the United States with his deported stepfather and ended up working in the fields of Sinaloa picking chili peppers. He was only 12 years old. I wrote his story related to the deportation phenomenon, but then back in my mind, I was always thinking, wow, there's kids working the chili pepper fields of Mexico. And that kind of grew into the next series.
This sort of reminds me of how the whole field of journalism works. You start out on a particular story, you educate yourself, and then once you finish, you educate your readers about what happened. And oftentimes we don't think about news media being such an important part of the education process, especially when it comes to major international developments. Tell us your thoughts on that subject.
Yeah, what drives me is curiosity. And I like to learn things. And then I like to share it with the world, with our readership, assuming that they're interested as well, right? And I tend to make sure that what I'm interested is going to have some resonance, or it's going to have some appeal to our readership. And so I've tailored the coverage as a way to illustrate kind of bigger events. I mean, there was millions of people deported in recent years, so there was a big backdrop. to the stories I was telling me. The story about farm laborers, there's a big backdrop. I mean, Mexico supplies much of our winter produce. So I realized, wow, illustrates a much bigger phenomenon. So I knew it wasn't just a story about these poor people picking vegetables. It was about poor people picking vegetables that we eat on a daily basis. And at retail chains, they claim to be socially responsible. So it wasn't so much a story about exploited laborers, but it was also a story about corporate malfeasance and corporate exploitation and corporate deceit, in some ways.
So how do you view the education role of news organizations, and not just print, obviously, but broadcast, because they provide education in different ways? Is there a responsibility on the part of news organizations to educate, or is it primarily an issue of making money and giving people
It's not
what
about
they
making
want?
money, John. We don't make a lot of money. No journalist goes into this business to make a lot of money. I went into this business because I thought that journalism serves a role in society, right? It's the fourth estate for a reason, right? You need an informed citizenry. So that's not why journalists go into this business. There's plenty of other businesses where you can make money. It's about educating. It's about enlightening. It's about keeping people informed on what's going on in the world and being an informed, responsible citizen. And I think it's absolutely essential in society for that. We're not doing well these days. And I think it's a threat not only to us, but I think it's to a functioning democracy.
So how do you decide on what news is appropriate for your readership? A lot of times people say, oh, most of our readers are just interested in local and regional issues, so we don't want to feed them the national and international stories that they're not going to want to read. And my thought is, of course, you give them what they want in terms of local and regional coverage, but I feel that there's an obligation on the part of news organizations to give them the rest, because otherwise it's an incomplete picture. And in this day and age, with more and more issues, crossing borders without regard for anything and affecting basically countries around the world, you can't ignore what's happening in other places.
Yeah, and the challenge is making what is going on in Mexico, connecting it to readers. Our readership is Southern California. We have a large Mexican-American population. A lot of people come from Mexico, so there's an inherent interest there in what's going on in Mexico. But beyond that, these days you have to get engagement, you have to get readership, so you have to really write about issues that are directly related or somehow related to our readership, right? So we're not going to be talking so much about local politics in Mexico. We do, but I focus my coverage on issues that directly relate to our Southern California readers or American readers. The food we eat, what could be more important than that? What could be more connected than that? The people that used to mow your lawn or repair your house, what happened to them? What happened to the busboy that used to clear your table at the diner? Well, he's down in Mexicali at this rundown hotel. It doesn't know what to do. So in that way, you get bigger. It's more relevant. You have to try and make the coverage more relevant to the readers' lives, right? So it has to be narrowed. We don't do, in the past, we would do stories about conditions of prisons in Mexico or Brazil or Latin America. That's a tougher sell these days to editors. It's not, how is that related to our readers' lives, right? So we don't have the luxury of doing those kind of stories anymore. It's not that we're not interested, but we have to make it more relevant to our readers' interests, right? So that's what I kind of focus on.
Is there any indication that readers wouldn't be interested in those issues? Because you mentioned those things, and I'm immediately sitting up.
Not as interested as, say, a story about the produce they eat.
Okay.
Right? If they say, well, prisoners have bleak lives in Paraguay or Argentina, well, they might just skim through that. They say, well, of course they do. They tell us something we don't know, kind of a thing. But if you say, hey, that tomato you just ate came from a slave, okay, boom.
You've got it.
They might see it's more relevant and it might spark a little curiosity. But I think that's we don't want to give up on foreign reporting, but when we do the foreign reporting, we have to somehow make it relevant to the lives of of our readers and people here in this country.
Readers have more opportunities to respond to journalists now than ever before. What are the kinds of things they write to you?
Oh, I get a lot of hate. I write a lot about Mexicans and this day and age with polarized politics. You write anything that kind of humanizes Mexicans, I get a lot of hate. I try and be fair, and I am fair. I mean, I endeavor to that, but you have to report all sides, and I do report all sides: the government, anti-immigrant, pro-immigrant. But you need voices of immigrants in there. But that sometimes that's enough just to set people off. So it's generally the story on Product of Mexico. People love that. They were just really mostly overwhelmingly positive, saying, "Hey, this is what journalism's all about, telling us something we didn't know and that's important to our lives," and had quite an impact because it turns out consumers really do care, and they do have a lot of power over retailers, and it's changed some buying behavior, and the retailers recognize that. So that's been overwhelmingly encouraging. But anytime you talk about, and I've written about national security issues, and some of my coverage has led to, for instance, I write a lot about drug tunnels, right? San Diego-Tijuana border is probably the busiest drug tunnel area in the country, if not the world, and I've been covering that for 10 years. And I would go in a lot of these tunnels and I'd write about these tunnels, and then after a few years I started realizing, well, what happened to these tunnels after they find them? They weren't filling in the tunnels. Turns out they would only cap either end of the tunnel, right? So the bad guys would just tunnel around the cap and reuse the tunnel. So I exposed that. I wrote a story. Senator Feinstein of California said, "Hey, this can't be happening." So she found funding to fill in the tunnels, at least on the U.S. side. So that's heartening. That was a national security story, and there was a threat, right? And it had remediating these tunnels that kind of slipped through the cracks of this multi-jurisdictional area on the border where you have DEA and CBP and all these different agencies, and it kind of nobody took responsibility for filling it in. So that's also some of the kind of coverage I've done. It's immigration, it's national security, it's economy, it's drug war.
So tell us about the experience of being in the tunnel, which is something most of us are probably not going to have a chance to do.
It's a bit claustrophobic, of course. But the first thing, the impression you get is, well, they're pretty sophisticated. They're generally 4 to 5 feet high and then about 3 feet wide. Ventilation systems, electrical systems, railing cart systems, and very cleverly designed hydraulics with elevators, because they have to bring in, tons of drugs and bring it through there. But it's always fascinating going down there and just thinking, how they operate this thing on a daily basis. The feds and the Mexicans have always busted these operations when there's nobody there, not when they're operational. But it would always, to me, it's always kind of sparked my imagination of what it's like to build one of these things. And I have run across tales of some of the tunnel builders. They build these things within a matter of months, and it's $1 million of investments, and they usually hold them up in the facility or in the house, and they dig round the clock. And then afterwards, when they're done, they just the urban legend is that they kill them, because there's one thing about a drug tunnel: it has to be a secret. Nobody can know where it is. And so the urban legend is that they kill these guys. I don't think they kill these guys, but they're brought in from other Mexican states, and they're immediately bust out, usually with blindfolds on, so they have no idea where they built it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, let's put you in charge of journalism. Let's make you a journalism czar, and also put you in charge of the journalism education connection. What kinds of things would you like to do, or do you think you could do to help educate readers, to help educate young people, connections in terms of schools and colleges and universities?
Well, in terms of educating them, in terms of about the importance of it, or about the practice of it?
The importance of these issues that you're covering and why they should want to know about them and how they affect their lives.
Yeah, I mean, this used to be common knowledge. Everyone respected the media, what we did, and journalism was a window on the world. And back when I was growing up, not too long ago, I'd read the paper cover to cover. I was fascinated. I was curious. Not that people aren't curious anymore, but there's just so many other different things competing for their time. So, how do we muscle our way back in? That's a good question. I don't. It's a real challenge, and the challenge for me is always telling stories in very ways that are interesting or gripping, engaging, and it's going to keep people turning the page or scrolling down the page, right? Making it relevant to their lives. And some of these legacy media, LA Times, New York Times, and Orlando Sentinel, we've got great reputations, certainly abroad we do, and there's value there as a known quantity that does journalism in a very skillful way with great responsibility. And we still endeavor to do it, and I think we do it still very well. The question is making readers, or making younger folks mainly, aware of what we do. I think there's due to a lack of news literacy these days. I think it's very important for young folks to realize the importance of journalism, and hey, you need to be informed. It's not all equal. They should. I'm a legacy media guy. They should at least give some attention to the folks who've been doing it for a long time and kind of endeavor to do it in a skillful way with great integrity and responsibility.
How do you reach them, though? Do you start when they're very young?
That's a good question. How do you reach them? My kids are only 3 or 5 years old, so they see me reading the paper every day. So, and I've actually talked to some folks who say their kids and the teenagers still read the printed paper. Of course, there's fewer and fewer, but yeah, these are habits that develop since when you're a kid, right? Mm-hmm. And now we're competing with games and other things in Facebook, and it's just hard to compete on that level. I mean, we're the spinach, and people want. Mm-hmm. They want their Sunday.
They want their Sunday. But what do you say to people who tell you, "Oh, I get my news from other sources. I don't need."
It depends on the source, But I mean, we should be in that mix, right? A lot of them say now it's Facebook. Well, yeah, Facebook has got some agreements with the New York Times and other legacy media. But that's a double-edged sword, because Facebook's deciding what's important and what's not. That used to be our role. Are they going to be doing it in a way that's responsible? Mm-hmm. We have to see, right? So our news, we used to be the filter. We're not the filter anymore, not to the extent that Google and Facebook and some of these other platforms now have distribution power. So that's all shifted. So we have to hope that these folks who have great power in what we read and how they direct us take this in a serious and responsible way, right? We're no longer the gatekeepers.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the issues you're looking at now, stories that you may investigate, pieces you may write?
Right now I'm working on economic stories, because it's really important. Most people don't realize how interconnected the Mexican and American economies are. They're our second or third biggest trading partner. Much of the appliances and TVs we get are built in Mexico, cars also, and much of what we produce goes to Mexico. And much of U.S. capital, money, pension money goes to Mexico for developing urban development and housing and all this stuff. So there's a lot of interesting stories that are evolved from that. I can't get into specifics for competitive reasons,
Sure.
And I always keep tabs on the situation on the border, immigration, if there's any new dynamics going on there. At this point, there's nothing that new to report in regards of immigration flows, I mean, they're down to record lows compared to years past. If a reporter had to rely on doing border stories and immigration stories coming in, he'd be out of work. There's not much new to report right now. If anything, there's more people leaving, and there's been studies showing there's more people leave. There's more net out migration than there is in migration these days. And the drug war, old story. Not too many new dynamics in that, although I monitor these, and if I see any new important trends or things or personalities surfacing, then I do cover them.
What kinds of things might you do in the future? I'm guessing that you're so involved in journalism that that's probably it for you as long as it's viable, but are there other things that you might want to do in the future outside of journalism?
I have, through my drug cartel coverage, I've had interest from Hollywood. I've optioned, some of my stories have been optioned to Hollywood. So I've written co-written two or three screenplays, and so I have an agent, and I do the Hollywood thing like a lot of reporters do, and you hope that hits. But for the most part, no. I came from this is my second career. I love journalism, and this is all I've ever wanted to do, right? So I don't really have any other plans aside from just keep charging forward and pursuing my passions. And I think this is important, and I hope the world appreciates us.
So how often do you go into Mexico, say in a typical week or a typical month?
It can go weeks sometimes, and then sometimes it's like every day. It depends. I just came back from covering the Pope. I was in Mexico City, and then I was in Morelia, and then I stuck around a few days in Mexico City doing other stuff. And before that, I was in Veracruz. So I live in San Diego, so I'm 15 minutes from the Tijuana airport. So I'm anywhere within Mexico within a couple of hours. So it's very nice. It's a foreign coverage, but I get to live in one of America's best cities. So it's ideal. I love my job. I love what I do.
What was it like covering the people as you were covering the Pope?
Yeah, I mean, the great enthusiasm. I mean, Mexico's a lot of Catholics there. I think more than anywhere else. One of the biggest populations in Latin America. So everybody went, hundreds of thousands of people, just crazy. He's a rock star, right? In Morelia, I think there were hundreds of thousands of people at the stadium, and the Pope, this was his fourth day, and he was a little tired, and he actually, this was surprising, he lashed out at somebody at the stadium. I don't know if you saw the coverage, but someone jostled him and tried to pull him into the crowd, and the Pope actually showed a side you've never seen. He actually lashed out at this person. Don't do that. Don't be selfish. So it just shows, to me, it was just amazing, the Pope's resilience and energy this 79-year-old man with one lung has on the fourth day. He's just out there and doing his best, but the crowds got a little too aggressive.
You cover a lot of serious, sometimes downright depressing issues. What do you do to escape at the end of the workday or work week?
Yeah, so what I do sometimes gets a little grim, and if you focus on dwelling it too much, it's kind of depressing actually. Luckily, I have a great wife who's very positive all the time, and I have a 3 and a 5-year-old. So you come home to that, and you just immerse yourself with the kids, and at least it goes away for a while, and then you get back into it. It can be tough a little while, because it can be relentlessly grim. And most of my work now is dedicated to investigative reporting. So there's not much variety. I used to be able to do fun, happy stories, and those do exist. But I've been gravitated toward these hard-hitting, revealing things that unfortunately tend to get a little grim sometimes.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Richard Marusi.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, John.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.